What's going on, folks? Today, we ask ourselves, what is growing out of my orchids? Phalaenopsis orchids is what we're talking about today in particular, and that's what you see here. Is that a root or is it a flower spike? Let's take a look, but first some terms. Root, spike, and Keiki. The roots. Phalaenopsis orchids are epiphytes and grow on other plants, rocks, and trees and are adapted to having their roots be exposed to air and light. Since they have evolved to have exposed roots, they easily absorb water, but will just as easily rot if they stay wet for too long. The silvery green color that you see on the roots is actually a protective cover called velamen that encases a thin root that is inside of that, and it stores the water and nutrients for the plant. Flower spikes. Phalaenopsis orchid flower spikes have a flatter, mitten-shaped tip compared to a root. While both roots and spikes can grow from the narrow sides of the crown, between the leaves, only the roots will grow from the wide side of the crown and not in between a leaf. New growth from there indicates that it's not a flower spike. Keikis or Keikis. A Keiki is a form of asexual propagation by an orchid. The baby plant is an exact clone of the mother. On a Phalaenopsis, a Keiki is a small plant growing from one node along the flower stem. Keikis can also grow at the base of the plant on Phalaenopsis orchids as well. So this is obviously a mature flower spike, but what we want to look at here is the tip. So you can see here that the tip has this irregular shape, and whether this was just coming out near the crown of the plant, it would still have this same basic shape. It's sort of like a mitten. This one, since it is a little bit more mature, it kind of doesn't exactly look like a mitten as much anymore. But we'll look at another one here in a few moments that definitely looks a lot more like that. So both that flower spike and the one we're looking at now are pretty well grown in, so you can definitely tell that it's a flower spike. I would have liked to have gotten some earlier shots, but these are what I have. So they're kind of almost even past the point of looking like a mitten. Now, when you see these are new roots, and they have more of the cone-shaped tip, and they come out toward the bottom of the plant. You can see how this flower spike is up higher on the crown, which is up here, and down here is are the new roots. So there's a root here and one here. So this was an orchid that we rescued. Somebody had left it out when it was almost dead, and we repotted it, and now it's looking good again. It's got a bunch of new leaves. All three of these are new since last year. It's got a flower spike. The old flower spike is underneath here. It was originally growing straight up out of the pot. You can see how it's kind of leaned over toward the sun, and that's kind of a bit more of a natural habit for an orchid. They sort of hang on a tree and hang to the side like that. Now, you can see on this little mini Phalaenopsis orchid that there's a aerial root growing out, but there's no sign of a flower spike. There are some new roots. You can see that's going to be a root. You can see it's kind of a cone and not that mitten shape. So it would already be taking on that kind of mitten shape by this point. When it first emerges, it's kind of difficult to tell, but by this point it should start looking like a mitten, so that one is almost certainly a root. Now this orchid has some really interesting roots. You can see this aerial root. It grows all the way from down in here up, and then it just grows straight up. So that's very interesting. You can see there's some new roots. Here's one root with a double tip on it. So it's kind of one going into two. So this, we have a new root down in here. So there's the big long arrow root and then a smaller root there in the background. But what we're interested here is this. So this is a new flower spike, and you can see how it looks like a mitten. So it's got kind of the thumb on the side there, and it's just a small, just a tiny little flower spike at this point, but eventually that is going to grow up into a large flower spike like this one. The Keiki would be the main method of propagation aside from seed, which is a really long and involved process. So ideally, you will get a Keiki that produces along the flower spike somewhere. You can see on an older flower spike here, the flower was out here. I've cut it back, and I did use some Keiki paste on the node here. Now in this case it produced a new flower spike instead of a Keiki. I also put some Keiki paste on the spike down here. So that node did not produce anything. That node produced a new flower spike. So that is what we got there. I was hoping for a Keiki so you could propagate the orchids, have another plant, but a new flower spike is pretty alright too. I can't complain. So after this flower is done, I will put some Keiki paste on the nodes where the flowers didn't emerge to see if I can get a Keiki instead of a spike. Now I think this time what I might do is withhold water starting slightly before when I apply the Keiki paste and kind of put it under stress, because as I understand it, the Keiki is a product of a stressful environment, so the orchid tries to reproduce when it's under stress. So both these are looking great. I have all these are new leaves. There's a couple of new leaves on this orchid. So no flower spike on this little mini phal, but you know, maybe it'll take the year off and just put some energy into growing some new roots. I do have a video on this orchid from last year where I'd repotted it because it was in kind of rough shape. So I did get this one on the half off rack, so it was a little beat up, but it's come back nicely, and it actually flowered for quite some time after I got it. So I think it just needs a little bit bigger pot because this one dries out really fast. Well, that's it, folks. So if you do see a new growth on your orchid and you're not sure if it's a root or a flower spike, give it a few days and check back, and it should start to kind of differentiate between that irregular shape and the kind of normal cone shape. So let me know what you find, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you next time.